Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to our second pre-conference day for our second Homeschool Plus conference. Carlo Ricci is back with us. Carlo, welcome.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you doing this. I know you've had to do it in an off hour in order to be able to accommodate your schedule. Thanks for sitting in a hotel room and recording for us. Thanks to Homeschool Life and G3 for supporting the conference through promotion. This is a Learning Revolution project. Do look at our other events, especially our Alternative Education Film Festival, which is going on right now. Herman Doyne tonight discusses his film, The Forbidden Education. There's 7 films that are available all month online to view, and then special interviews with the directors. Thanks also to Blackboard Collaborate for this oh-so-stable, not always quick to download program. For those of you who are in the live audience, you can click to the left of the map. You're looking for the star icon. And if you click on that twice and then click on the map, you can let us know where you're participating from. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina. Carlo, you're on the West Coast, right?
I'm in LA right now, yes.
Feel free to put the note in the chat as well.
So Steve, you let me know when I'm good to go. And
you are now good to go.
Great. Thanks very much, Steve, for inviting me again. I really appreciate and enjoy the opportunity to interact and speak with everybody at this session. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the mic for everybody and make everything available to you so you can go ahead and use anything you like to use on the Blackboard Collaborate. And I'll just give you a quick rundown so that if you want to, and if this is new to you, that you can figure out how it works. So if you want to make a comment, you actually want to chat, you just click on the talk button, and then you have the mic and we can interact that way. And I just want to make sure that we have enough audio sessions open. So I'm looking at how many talkers we can have, and it's at the max, so that's great. And if you want to chat, you can actually go on to the, you see there's a small rectangular box at the bottom, so you can just click anything. I'll just put hi for now and hit enter, and there you go. Then you can see my comment. So if you want to use the chat, please feel free to chat with each other as we move forward. So rather than preventing you from doing things, I like to open everything up and give you the opportunity to explore and interact with each other and with me, you know, in as many ways as the technology allows us to do. So feel free to speak to each other in the chat, and if you have a question, you can either hit the raise up button or you can just click on the talk button and we can go from there. So since we're a small group, maybe what we'll do is we'll just start off and everybody who chooses to can test their mic, make sure that it's working, and maybe take about 10 seconds to say who you are and where you're from and what your interests are so that we can move forward along that way. Or if anybody wants to start us off or say anything, I'd be happy to you know, give you the mic and we can go from there as well. So maybe the best thing to do is I'll just go down the list, and if you choose not to, and if you just want to remain silent or pass, you're obviously free to do that as well. So Amy, do you want to just click on the talk button and see if, I notice you're on your cell probably, so I'm not sure how the mic would work for that. So you can test it if you like, Amy, and you should be able to speak. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So you want to just give us a quick 10-second who you are and what your interests are?
Sure. I am Amy Anderson. I am from Washington State, and I have 6 boys. And I am just figuring out homeschooling, and I'm excited about this conference. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And Christine, you want to test your mic as well? Just hit the talk button, and then so I think Christine is just typing it in the chat. So you can type in the chat, Christine, if you like. Dana, you want to try your mic? No worries, Christine. So Dana, if you just top left-hand corner, there's a talk button if you'd like to do that, or you can pass or type it in the chat if you prefer. Heidi, no mic either, so you can just do it in the chat if you like, Heidi. JJ? All right, so I'm assuming people are, Keely, do you want to try your mic? No mic either. Kenza? Marie? It's interesting. Keely's on the treadmill listening to the talks. That's fantastic. All right, so you figured out the chat, so if you don't feel comfortable using the mic, that's fine. And continue using the chat, and we can go from there for sure. So there are a few things that I'm interested in talking about, and if anybody wants to take us in a different direction, I'm happy to do that. My interest is in self-directed learning, and my name is Carlo Ricci, and I teach at a Faculty of Education and a Graduate Studies program. And you know, the whole notion of self-directed learning is to empower the learner so that they can decide what to learn, where to learn, and so on. And what's interesting is the transferability between, you know, learning in an educational setting and learning within the context of a home. And so that's why I sort of transition this particular talk rather than focusing on learning in a formal sense. I'm thinking of learning in the context of parenting and so on. And of course, that's, you know, that's connected to learning in general. And, you know, different people define learning in very different ways. And so part of what's happening is with, you know, state-defined learning systems, and I'm thinking of, you know, the 1984 or something like that, where terms are taken and co-opted and twisted. I like what you know, we have to consider and reflect on is how the state or schools, mainstream schooling, takes terms that we're so used to and really redefines them. And what we need to do is we need to take back these particular terms. And so when it comes to learning, the best definition I could give you for learning is one that comes from John Holt. And I really like his take on it and what he says. He talks about how learning is living. It is impossible to be alive and conscious, and some would say unconscious, without constantly learning things. So the idea is that learning is something that happens all the time. We're all learners. We're born to be learners. We are natural learners. And so this whole notion of self-directed learning, or what I like to call the willed curriculum, W-I-L-L-E-D, and essentially means doing what you will. And, you know, my book title is that, you know, the willed curriculum. And basically, it's about the learner deciding what to learn, when to learn, where to learn, whether to opt in or opt out. And this also connects strongly to unschooling. So, you know, we had somebody mention that they're homeschooling. So when some people homeschool, they follow traditional school curriculum. Others use what's called unschooling. And from an unschooling perspective, it's more learner-centered, democratic. And unschoolers give learners control and empower them so that they can take charge of their own learning. So rather than having a top-down curriculum where somebody tells you what to learn, when to learn, where to learn, why to learn, it's more empowering when the learner gets to make all of these types of decisions and determinations. And so this whole notion of self-determination, I think, is really powerful. And it connects to love, because love, I think, is extremely important, because we have to do what we love. We have to do what we're passionate about. And also, of course, it helps if we're in loving environments. And so the idea of this is that love would be the starting point. And so when we think about our whole notion of love, so how do we define love for ourselves, and what does it mean to love? And what does it mean to be within a loving context? I think all of those things go a long way to start exploring and understanding what it means to learn in a willed way, or using self-determination as a starting point in your learning. And some people say, well, then, you know, I love somebody so much that I force them to do it because it's good for them. And I think, in my mind, that's not love, right? I think love needs to be very open, respectful. The person who's experiencing it needs to feel loved, and it also has to be, respectful in the sense that the learner feels that they're being listened to and that their interests are being trusted, and what they're interested in is being trusted. So I think trust is also an extremely important part of it. And when you think about the whole notion of trust, John Holt says that he could sum up everything he's ever written in 2 words: trust children. So I think what we have to do is open ourselves up more to respecting, trusting, creating caring environments for young people and all people. So it's not just about young people, but this is about how we interact and connect with each other, with our world, with the universe we live in, with the earth. So it's about all of those things. And it's not just about how, one particular population, learns things or doesn't learn things. And so to come back to this whole notion of co-opting, I just want to give you a sense that when you think about play, how do mainstream schools define play? Like, what does play mean? And in their mind, play is very specific. It has a specific purpose. And learning also has a very specific meaning and a very specific purpose. So when we use words like learn and play, we probably mean particular things with it. Schools and mainstream curriculum mean very different things, often about, around those particular terms. So when they talk about play, they talk about children play in order to learn something, right? Because when they talk about learn, they have this very narrow definition of what it means to learn. So when they talk about play, they say play is a tool that children use to learn what the state or the school or the teacher or so on wants them to learn, right? So they take these terms that are very positive, and so people hearing it would say, well, look, this particular school talks about play, and this particular school talks about learning. And of course they do, right? But we have to listen very carefully. How are these particular terms being defined? And so when you think about this whole notion of play as in, play to learn what somebody else wants you to learn, it becomes, I think, very complicated and very different. And we just have to be attuned to that. We have to understand that these are the specifics that they're meaning by these particular terms. And so they do the same thing with using video games, tablets, computers. They introduce all of these things into mainstream schooling. And of course, we can introduce all of these things into our homes. But the question then becomes, what do we mean by these things, right? And what purpose are these particular tools like television and, anything you can think of, all of these tools that are introduced into, learning environments like mainstream schooling, what are they trying to get us to focus on, right? And they use all of these things, all of these particular tools as, it's in order to get children to learn what they want them to learn. And what I'm proposing is that we are attuned to that and we think that there are other ways of doing things, right? And homeschoolers, unschoolers specifically, people who are interested into self-determined learning, democratic schools, free schools like Sudbury Valley School in Farenga, Massachusetts, Summerhill, the Albany Free School, Manhattan Free School, like a lot of these types of schools that are, the Brooklyn Free School and so on, that are North Star is another good organization that focuses on these types of things. And they want to take the definition of play and learning and, what you do with tablets and computers and bring it back to the learner so that the learner then becomes extremely empowered to be able to do this in very specific ways. And so I think we have to recognize that, first of all, you say, well, would it work, right? If we just said to children or anybody, learn whatever you want, we'll trust and respect that. Is that something that'll work? And of course, all of those organizations that I shared with you are very clear examples of people that are making it work. So thankfully, we have unschoolers and self-determined type of schooling environments and learning environments so that we can point to it and say, look, yes, of course it works, because this isn't just theory that I'm sharing with you. It's happening, right? It's happening in the world, and all of these people are actually doing it, and people are learning all of the things they need to learn very successfully by following this particular model. And it's much gentler and loving than a externally imposed top-down model that forces people to learn particular things. And John Taylor Gatto talks about people who self-determine, they all learn to read and do math and all of those things that we're really interested in, but they learn it in much more powerful, gentler ways because it comes from within, right? So my, idea, or what I want to share with you also, is that if, the least we could do is, and I know some people are skeptical about this type of thing, and if you don't want to adopt it or even think about it, that's fine. Of course, not everybody is going to agree, and I could totally accept that. But at least I think what we need to do at the very least is have an awareness and not to ignore or deny that self-determined learning is happening and that it works, because we know from all of these examples that I've given you that it does work and people are making it work. So it's not just theory, but it's happening. And even more powerful than that, the reason why we should know that it's happening is because not only do unschoolers do it and people who are interested in self-determined learning within a particular institutional context like schooling are doing it, but because each one of us self-determines our learning, right? So we know it works because we all do it and we constantly do it. So whether you're learning about a new recipe or how to fix a bike or whatever it is that you need to be learning, we do it constantly on a daily basis, and we decide how we want to learn it. So maybe we want to go to a formal place to learn about this particular thing, or maybe we want to go on YouTube, or maybe we want to ask somebody we know that might know this, or research it some other way, or figure it out on our own, and so on. So the options are limitless. So the power in this type of self-determined learning is that the learner gets to decide what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, where they want to learn it, and so on and so forth, right? And I think in the end, they're much better off because they have this empowerment and this understanding of how they learn, because they've been doing it their own lives and they've had control of their learning their own lives. So because they have this type of understanding and this type of control, they can feel confident that they can learn whatever it is that they need to learn when they need to learn it. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And of course, coming back to my point, it's that if I were just to tell you that this works, trust me, and there was no support for it, then I think it would be, fair for you to be skeptical and say, well, I understand you're saying in theory it works, but really, in the real world, does it work? And of course it does, right? And I've given you all of these indications of different people that are doing it, that are thankfully doing it, because they're showing us how this type of way of learning is very powerful. And in my mind, I think that's how each of us learn best. We learn best by, by following all of this, right? We learn best by deciding for ourselves what we want to learn, because if we're passionate about something, we'll learn it and we'll continue it. And I noticed Christine has a question in the chat, and she says, at what age do you feel a child can decide to be a self-determined learner? And my thing is, conception and right after conception, right? Right from in utero. This is what we do as human beings. We learn. And we decide what we want to learn and how we want to learn, and we learn how to talk, and we learn how to walk, and we learn how to do all of these different types of things as young people. And it's incredible to see somebody who's a newborn and then see them a year later or 2 years later or 3 years later, how much they've actually learned and how they've decided to learn about these particular things, largely determining what it is they need to learn. And I just want to give you a few examples, because I understand that people can be skeptical, or if this is new to you, that it might be something difficult to grasp, but all I could share with you is my own personal experience with it as well. And so everything I'm sharing with you now, for example, I've learned on my own, right? I have a PhD, and none of this that I learned in institutional schooling, right? I never took a course on holistic education, which I'm interested in, or unschooling, or John Holt, or any of this. All of this stuff that I'm sharing with you, I've learned on my own. And so, you know, not only that, but I look at my own children. So I have two children who are currently 9 and 11. And we practice this type of self-determination within our own home. And I've done it all along, ever since, you know, my children, this is all that they're used to. And of course, they go to friends' houses and they see that things are very different there. And they, I think, really appreciate the fact that they're so empowered, right? So they get to decide when to go to bed, what to eat, whether to go to school or not, you know, what programs or activities they want to participate in, and so on. And so what happens if you give young people so much freedom? And what happens is that when they are free and they are empowered, they learn that they appreciate their freedom, and they learn that they don't want to infringe on other people's freedoms, right? So it's not to say that in my family, my children could do whatever they want, and whatever I'm interested in or whatever my wife is interested in is not important. It's all about children. So that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we live within a democratic framework, and so all of our needs and all of our wants need to be taken into consideration. And so what happens is that my wife and my children and me in the whole formula, we all have a say, right? And we all try to work things out. So if I want to do something and somebody else wants to do something else, and somebody else wants to do something else, and somebody else wants to do something else, well, we have a discussion about that, and we reach a consensus. We try to figure it out. And because we're always open to each other and we all make concessions, so I know you don't want to go, you know, for example, we're in California now. We took a family trip, and so one of my daughters, she wasn't really keen on going to Alcatraz, but I wanted to go, and so we had a conversation, and, you know, we're going to do what you want to do here, and I really want to go there, so can you please, you know, come? And of course, she said, yes, that's fine, you know. So again, and it's not always the adult that comes up with the solution, because sometimes we have specific conflicts that I can't think of a resolution for, but they can. And they've been doing this since they were very, very young. And it really humbles you as a parent, because you think that as a parent, the adult, I have to have all the control and all the say. Once you relinquish that and you allow everybody to participate and try to come up with a framework, it becomes very powerful, because everybody has a say. And there's another question in the chat that I've just noticed. It's, what's the difference between deschooling and homeschooling? Well, you know, John Holt used the term unschooling, and at the time he meant something similar between unschooling and homeschooling. But the way it's currently, or the way I'm currently defining it, is homeschooling is the big umbrella term, and some people who homeschool do something called unschooling. And homeschooling, you know, people do it in very different ways. And some people who homeschool follow a very traditional school-type curriculum. So they do what happens in schools, they just do it at home. Unschooling is very different. Unschooling is not following an externally imposed curriculum, but empowering the learner. So the learner gets to decide what to learn, when to learn, where to learn, whether to opt in or opt out. So it's very empowering for the learner, and the learner has a lot of, you know, control over their situation and their life and their learning. And so I think it's, you know, it's a very positive step. And it's, I think if we're interested in ethics, I think this is where we need to go. And again, you know, if I didn't have my personal experience to share with you and say, look, I do it in my family, this is how it works, I could understand people being a little bit skeptical. So what I want to do is I just want to take some time and share with you a few examples of how it's actually worked and continues to work in my own life with my own family and my own children, and how it's very empowering for all of us, right? Because it's not that the parents have all the power and they say to the children, whatever I say has to happen. It's open. So, all right, here's a problem. We've just come up with there's somebody wants to do something, somebody wants to do something else or whatever. Whatever the problem is, now we have to figure out a solution. So it's not up to the parent to decide, but let's have a conversation about this type thing. Well, how can we resolve this conflict? Anybody have any ideas? And it's not that formal. It's not like we sit down and have a meeting about it, but it's wherever, we could be walking around and, somebody says, oh, I want to do this. Oh, but we were supposed to go there today. All right, well, what do we want to do, right? So are you going to go there and we're going to go where we're supposed to go? Or what, how are we going to resolve this conflict? Can you do that another time? Or, what do you want to do? And ultimately, it's, the person makes that decision about what they want to do. Maybe they just say, well, you go off and I'm going to stay home. I don't feel like coming, or whatever that particular situation is. But let me just pause for 1 second, because I know I've been saying quite a bit and I wanted this session to be interactive, and it is through the chat, and I appreciate that. But I also want to give people the opportunity to share with the larger community using the microphone or ask questions if they choose to do that as well. So does anybody have a question? And there's a little hand symbol, so you can hit that if you like, and I could call you to the microphone, or you can type something in the chat if you prefer to do it that way. And
Carlo, I think you may have missed Heidi's question about research studies.
Okay, so can you talk about research studies that support unschooling? Thanks, Steve. Sure. I mean, there are all kinds of anecdotal examples of how this works, right? There's a whole school in psychology called self-determination theory, right? And so you could, if you're interested, I mean, there's not enough time to go into it here, but just look up self-determination theory and realize, you see the work of Edward Deci, for example, and even read John Holt and so on. And a lot of this research directs us to the importance of self-determination, right? Of course, it's an ethically important thing to do, I think, because telling people what to do, when to do it, if they have no interest in it, is something that I find very difficult to accept. And so I think that self-determination theory is, tells us that if people are interested in something, if people are passionate about something, they'll do it. And all of those examples, so if you go to the Sudbury Valley, for example, they have all kinds of documented, they have books of people who started off, Sudbury Valley has been around since 1968 in Framingham, Massachusetts. And so they have books about what adults now who were at Sudbury look like and what they're doing with their life. So there's all kinds of anecdotal evidence there. There's unschoolers now who are adults that are writing about their own personal narratives and their own stories about how they've learned particular things and what they're doing now. And, the same for Summerhill and other self-determined types of schools. Then, Dr. Brian Ray does some research around homeschooling and how people who homeschool, they do as well as or better than people on SATs and ACTs, and, people who go to post-secondary institutions do better. There's also studies around homeschoolers that show that they vote more, they participate in their community more, they volunteer more, all of those different types of things. So there's a lot of positive research that's out there that really enhances our understanding of how this works and how important it is, right? And in my own personal life, my parents, just because of when they were born and so on, they didn't go to mainstream schooling for very long. My mother, I think, went to grade 4 and my dad went to grade 8 or something like that. And they've done really well in life, in terms of their financial stability, their, family relationships, friendships, all of those different types of things. They continue to do very well as adults in the world that we live in with very little schooling. So I have, my question would be, well, what are you saying if you're saying that schools are so important? And there's another study that I recently read in the Golden Mail, which is a Canadian newspaper, and the article is written by Erin Miller, and she talks about more recently, I'm quoting her, that Nobel Prize winning economist James Heckman has published numerous studies showing how grades and standardized tests don't predict later life success, such as employment and income level. So let me read that again. So James Heckman has published numerous studies showing how grades and standardized tests do not predict later life success, such as employment and income level. So this, to me, is extremely powerful research, right? So if you think about it, what if we took this seriously? Because most people say, well, you have to go to school. If you don't go to school and you don't get good grades and you don't do well on standardized tests, you're not going to be successful in life. Well, here we are now, a Nobel Prize winning researcher is telling us that those things do not determine success, such as employment and income level in life, right? So I think this is something that we have to become more attuned to. And of course, the more that people go to mainstream schools as the default, and the fewer examples we have, like my parents and so on, where you didn't have to go to school to move forward. It wasn't assumed that people who didn't go to school wouldn't be successful in life. The way we make that, we have that myth, I think, in our world now. And so I think that it's very important for us to continue to reflect and to think about and to challenge and to remind ourselves of history. Schools are very new, right? Schools have only been around for 150, 200 years. And so, these mainstream schools, compulsory schools, the way we know them, are fairly new. And so we have to understand the history of them, right? They were never about freedom and liberation. They've always been about controlling people's minds, bodies, spirits, and emotions, right? And we could see that within the mainstream as well. So somebody has a particular agenda and they're trying to impose that particular agenda on people. And of course, if your worldview or your philosophy is one where you believe in that agenda and you buy into that agenda, then you don't see a problem with it, and you might assume that schools are very neutral places. But those of us who don't agree with what happens within the mainstream context, and we realize that the curriculum is very arbitrary, and why do people have to learn that and not something else? And who benefits and who gets left out? And all of these questions from critical theoretical perspectives come into play. Then I think we have to really start to think deeply about a lot of this and a lot of what's happening within this particular context, and not just accept the status quo, but challenge and think about it for ourselves. So when people say you need grades and marks and bells and whistles and all of those different types of things to learn, we know that's not true, right? In fact, those things probably all diminish learning, because it makes people, first of all, they're learning things they have no interest in a lot of times. There's a lot of fear and anxiety around and pressures around those types of things, and all of those things diminish learning rather than increase learning, right? So let me just, it says, a friend of mine who has a son, never been in school, started to show less interest in learning. He is 8 and quite good at math, for example, but he just doesn't want to do it if he thinks it's too hard. Any advice? And my idea is that, the only learning you need to do is learn what you need to learn in the moment, right? And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that too. There are a couple of studies that have come up, and in these particular studies, they I'm just looking for the quotes for you, and I'll share them with you. So here's Krashen and McLuhan in 2007, for example, and they write that there is not a critical period for learning to read. Much research and many individual cases point the view that late intervention based on free reading can work for struggling readers. And here's the point I want to point out to you, that there is no critical period, quote unquote, for learning to read, and that improvement in literacy can occur at any age. And Worden, Hinton, and Fisher explain how, while there is no evidence, this is 2011, while there is no evidence for limited critical periods in brain development in limited domains, such as the strength of vision in the 2 eyes, no evidence supports a critical period for academic skills. So, my sense would be that the only math any of us need to learn is the math that we need to live our lives in the current moment. So we don't have to do something that we don't need in the current moment, right? And when we need it, we will learn it at that time. So imagine if you don't learn any of the 0 to grade 8 math until you're like 15 years old. How easy would it be to learn it formally when you need to, right? So what type of math do we need? Well, it depends. Each of us needs a different type of math, right? We're all very different. So the type of math that I need to live my life is very different than the type of math that each of you need to live your lives. And so in my own context, for example, I'm not very good at school math because I have no interest in it. But I am brilliant in life math. So what does that mean? That means that whatever math I need to live my life, I'm very accomplished at it, right? Very proficient in the math that I need to live my life. And I think that if people are forced to do a type of math that they don't need in their own lives, then it becomes pretty difficult, right? What they need to do is they need to focus on the math that they need to live their lives now. So when my children were very young, what type of math did they need? Well, they liked the remote control, they liked to eat, so they needed to work our digital oven, right? And so they needed to learn the numbers to press in order to get the buttons to press in order to get our oven to work. They wanted to watch television. They needed to know what numbers were on the remote control that corresponds to the TV program that they wanted to watch. So that's what, the numbers you need to live your life. So you want to buy things now. Well, you need to know how much things cost and what, if it's on sale, how much of a sale are you getting? Is it a good deal or a bad deal, right? So all of these types of things, all of these types of math is cooking and so on. So the math that they need to live their lives is the math that they need to be learning. And if people are trying to impose a different type of math on you that has no importance to you, then of course that's not going to be very helpful, right? And it's not worthwhile and it's not valuable, I think. Now, of course there are people who just love math for the sake of loving math, right? And people have a passion for math, just like they have a passion for skateboarding and all kinds of other things. So thanks, Keely. I appreciate your comment and enjoy your day. So I think, this is where we need to be going. So does anybody else have any questions before I go into some specific examples that I had that I wanted to spell out for you? All right, so let me just share a few examples. So one of my daughters, when she was younger, wanted to play soccer, and we see soccer as being the beautiful game, right? Where people have this passion for it, and it's for her, it wasn't the beautiful game, right? It was very aggressive. There were everybody was fighting for the ball. People were pushing and shoving, and parents were yelling, and of course nobody was being malicious. But what it was is that they were they were just being themselves, right? And they were just enjoying that particular activity in ways that they knew how to enjoy that particular activity. And in this particular example, she decided that she didn't want to go back. And we had already paid our fees, and it was pretty expensive to sign her up for the whole season. And she said, look, the beautiful game is not so beautiful. I don't enjoy it. And, she's a very gentle soul. And so what everybody was, pushing and moving around for the ball, she just thought, you know what, you want it that bad, you can have it. And so she said, I don't want to go back. So as parents, we said, you know what, that's fine. If you don't want to go back, don't go back. And of course, we're not going to get our money back or anything like that. So we just accepted that and lost that. I think it was like $300 or something like that at the time. And I was at a conference and I shared this with people once, and they said to me, well, you taught her that to quit, right? To let teammates down and to let other people down. And I simply thought about it, and I said to them, look, if she had broken her leg, would you excuse her from participating in that particular activity? And they said, well, of course, if she had broken her leg, then, and I thought, well, isn't her spirit just as important as a broken leg? And I think people started to think that that might be a pretty good way of looking at it as well. And if you look at human beings holistically, we have to look at them as mind, body, spirit, emotions. And if your spirit is being broken and you're being dispirited, I think what you have to do is you have to make sure that you create loving environments where those particular things don't happen. And for me, my daughter is much more important than $300 or whatever it was. Now, you know, and she decided not to do that, but then she tried other things. And some of them she decided she didn't like, and some of them she decided she really did like. And so, you know, it's a learning experience for all of us as we were going through it. And to me, that's a perfect example of how, you know, often we say, well, make sure that children don't quit, and say to them, look, you have to follow through. So I paid the money, you decided to sign up, you have to stick it out to the end. If you don't stick it out, you know, then if you want to quit, you quit after the season or something like that. And to me, I don't think that's enough. I think that, you know, we have to teach people to quit rather than to continue. And I don't want to use the business world as a model, but, you know, they often say, don't continue throwing good money after bad money, right? And so if they decide they no longer want to do it, accept it and move forward from that particular position. And I think it's important to do that. And I think that my children are a lot stronger now, and they've actually discovered what it is that they're really passionate about, the things that they really like and the things that they really enjoy, rather than, you know, situations and contexts that not so much, right? And so, you know, the other example I want to share with you is, I remember one of my children when she was very, very young, she was playing with a sippy cup and she wanted to figure out how to open the sippy cup. And I was thinking, as a loving dad, I'm just going to go up to her and help her because she's struggling. And so I went up to her and I said to her, look, I'm going to help you open the sippy cup. So I took it and opened it, and she just wailed. Like, she was very little, and she just started going ballistic. And I thought, what just possessed this little one? And then I thought about it for a while, and I said, look, she's absolutely right. She knows what she needs to do in order to learn, right? She knows what she needs to do in order to learn. And what I did was I just interfered with her learning. And you know, that was a bad thing, right? And she knows that I know how to open the sippy cup. She was playing with the sippy cup and was struggling with it, but that was her way of learning, right? She knows that that's what she needs to do to learn. And to me, that's such a powerful example that it reminds me that it is that young people come with knowledge already about how to learn particular things, right? It's not that we have to teach them how to learn. They know how to learn. So if we just step back and listen, we'll realize that, you know, that these young people have figured it out. And there's another example that I just got recently from one of my students in one of my classes, and he shared with us how there was a young person who his daughter wanted to learn all about reptiles. That's what she wanted to learn about. So they have a reptile museum in their neighborhood, and she went 3 times that week. And he said, you know, bless the guide, because the guide would repeat the same things for 3 days, all 3 days that they went there, and take out the same reptiles, hand them to her. She would ask the same questions, and they would answer the same questions. And it was very repetitive. But, you know, those of us who are into teaching and learning theory know that one good way to learn is through repetition, right? So this 4-year-old, not reading educational theory, understood that if she wanted to learn about reptiles, which she did, she had to go back to that place over and over again and ask the same questions over and over again in order to solidify this in her mind, right? And I think that by doing this, it becomes really important and really powerful. And so if we listen to young people and listen to what, you know, their interests are, their passions are, listen to how it is they want to pursue their learning, they know. And often you hear parents saying to children or adults to children, like, stop asking the same questions, or you asked me that already, or we went over that already, you know that already. But from their perspective, they need to ask these questions, right? They're trying to figure it out. And this is how they figure these particular things out, right? So it's important for us to be open, to listen. And I think all of this comes back to loving, right? Because if you really love somebody and you start from a place of love, you're open to all of this, to listening to what the learner is asking, even if they ask it 100 times. You know that this is what they're interested in, this is what they're asking, and I'm open to receive this and go over it over and over again as many times as you want it, because we have this unconditional love that's at the core of this, right? And it's coming from that particular place. And I think that's an extremely important place to start with and to start from. So does anybody else have any questions? Because I want to make sure that I...
Carlo, there were 2 questions earlier that you missed, and I promised that we would go back to them. So let me get my...
Sure, go ahead, Steve. It's hard sometimes because I'm flipping screens and I miss something that's going on.
Kenza asked, how do you know what you may need later in your life, and you are suddenly there but no time to learn all that you would need at that time? This was when you were talking about, I think, sort of real-time learning.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and it's a very common question that people ask. And you know, the other thing is, you don't know what you're going to learn or need to know in the future, and that's why you shouldn't be wasting your time in the present learning all kinds of things that you may have absolutely no need for in the future, right? And again, we think that whatever the school curriculum is useful for adult life, but as we know, it's not, right? A lot of us forget 90% of what we learn in school and all of those different types of things. So because nobody could predict the future, the best we can do is know that whenever we need to learn something, we can learn it. And those quotes that I shared with you earlier about that there are no critical periods to learn particular things, I think comes to this particular question as well. And so we have to recognize that nobody could predict the future. Nobody knows what anybody is going to need to know in the future, but all of us live in the present. And this comes to, from a very holistic place as well. That because what we need to do is not focus on the past and not focus in the future, but focus in the present. So in the present moment, what do I need to learn in order to live my life to the fullest, right? And the person knows whatever it is that they need to learn. And so in that particular moment, you learn those things. And there are all kinds of anecdotal stories as well where, people didn't go to mainstream schooling and then they realized that they need to learn a particular type of math, for example, or pass an ACT or an SAT or something like that before they can get into post-secondary institution. Of course, that's not true, right? Because there are a lot of open universities and so on. For example, in Canada, we have Athabasca University, which is a fully accredited Canadian university. And all you need to get in there is to be 16 years of age. So you don't need your transcripts, you don't need to have a school diploma, you just have to register. And as long as you're 16, and if you're younger than 16, you just need a note from your parents. And this is true in a lot of places in the U.S. as well. So I don't want to perpetuate the myth that you need schooling in order to go to post-secondary. But if you did want to go to that particular route, people learn it in 3 weeks. They learn all the math that they needed to learn in order to be at a particular place or whatever it is, right? So again, there are no critical periods to learn academic things. We could learn it whenever we need to learn it. And so, a lot of times we're just wasting time learning arbitrary things that have no connection to us when what we should be living is in the moment, right? Become much more mindful of our present and, make sure that we can live the present moment to the fullest. And if we're doing that, we're naturally preparing ourselves in very open ways to genuine ways to what the future will bring, because we're constantly living in that present moment and the future will come eventually. So I hope that helps.
Piyush had asked about exams. She's asked it a couple of times and it's slipped by us, but she was very specific about the exams. And concerned about those specific exams.
So what specifically about exams?
Well, she said, what about exams? So you're saying people can learn what they need when they need it. I think she's saying, but we do know what's coming up if we're in a system that has a set of exams. And then she said the 10+2 system, or IGCSE, A-levels, AP, IBMYP, or IBBP diploma program.
Right. So all of these types of things are arbitrary, right? And, you don't have to, first of all, I mean, if you choose to go that route, that's a choice that you're making. But we also have to recognize that there are alternative pathways to get into post-secondary institutions if that's what your goal is. So you don't have to write exams to be a successful adult. If you want, you could pass through, 99% of all of that exam writing and test taking and all of those types of things. Then, the next part of it is we have to think more critically about these types of exams. And this is why in the U.S. there's a lot of institutions that are now foregoing requirements for SAT and ACT exams in order to enter into those particular institutions. Because people are beginning to recognize in very substantive ways that these exams do not predict success in post-secondary institutions. So they're doing away with them. So places that said we need, before you apply or along with your application, you have to have ACT, SAT exams, they've, decided that that's no longer relevant or valuable. And of course the exams are not, not important, right? And I remember a long time ago, there was an unfortunate situation. Sometimes we make more of the exams rather than real life. And my dean at the time, he and I were having a conversation, and he's a pilot, and he says the best pilot he's ever flown with wasn't capable of passing that particular examination. So we have this myth that if you pass an exam, it means that you're competent, and if you don't pass it, it means that you're not incompetent. And again, for me, that's a huge myth. And so he said to me, would you rather fly with somebody who can pass the exam or somebody who can actually fly the plane? And of course, it becomes clear that those things aren't the same. And then I had a parent contact me once, and her daughter wanted to become a hairstylist, work at a beauty salon. And the instructors said she was really good at her craft. She had letters from customers that said to her that she's really good. They love the way she cuts her hair. They love the way that she interacts. Like, everything was very positive. But because she had test anxiety, she wasn't able to pass the standardized exam that she had to pass in order to cut hair. And so, again, you have to come back to the question and say, well, the teachers are saying she can do it. She's saying she can do it. The customers are saying she can do it. Yet this criteria is saying she can't. So who is creating these gatekeeping mechanisms, and who are we leaving out? And how are we all suffering because we're not allowing particular people into particular professions because they don't pass these types of arbitrary types things, right? And so, I think that people are acting as gatekeepers. We're using exams as gatekeeping, and we're all suffering. Because imagine how many creative people, for example, let's think of something horrible like cancer, and we create obstacles and say the only people that are allowed to get into this and become researchers are people who think in this way and pass these particular exams and so on. But imagine if we allowed people who think outside the box, people who are very different in thinking, that we don't allow in. Maybe we would be making a lot more headway because we would have people who are thinking in very different ways, very creative ways. This diversity may have been helpful rather than hurtful when it comes to that. And of course, we all see these types of situations where people who are, who have passed exams and have completed schooling as doctors or lawyers or whatever it is, politicians, are not successful, don't continue to do, these types of things. So we put too much faith in these types of things to the point where often people, unfortunately, are not as prepared as we think they are just because they have a particular diploma, right? And I noticed there's a question there about how to get admission in college or university if no exam is given. Again, there are all kinds of open universities, and I've written a piece in JUAL, which is the Journal of Unschooling and Alternative Learning, that I founded and edited. It's an academic peer-reviewed journal, and I noticed we're starting to run out of time, so I'll just say if you're interested, go read it. And it's about it's about open universities, and there are all kinds of open universities. You know, the first one was started, and I'm getting the dates off by a couple of years, but started to be thought about in the 1930s, and it was UK Open. And it wasn't until 1969 that they chartered UK Open University, so it took them all that time from the 30s to 1969 before people said, okay, maybe we'll try it and let anybody in and see what happens. And of course what happens is that the people they let in do well, and they're successful, right? Just like in mainstream schooling. So there are these myths that we have to continue to challenge ourselves about. And it wasn't until 1971 that UK Open offered its first, courses. And so there are all kinds of, in Ontario and in Canada here and in the US, there are all kinds of homeschoolers and unschoolers and people who haven't gone through formal schooling, without diplomas, without exams, without these things, that get into university all the time. So we have to recognize that there are these alternative options, thankfully, and that people are making it work, and it is working. So it's possible, and not only is it possible, it's happening. And people don't have a hard time. Anybody who wants to get into a post-secondary institution can get into a post-secondary institution, right? And again, Athabasca is an example in Canada, and there are others, and UK Open and so on and so forth, right? And all universities in Canada have alternative ways to get in as a mature student or so on and so forth that allow people to get in maybe on a trial basis, and there are all kinds of ways to get into post-secondary institutions without exams, without schooling, and so on. Any other final thoughts or questions before we... All right, so I'm going to wrap it up because, again, I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that I'm faithful to it and I'm conscious of that. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time and your comments, and I enjoyed our interaction together, and thanks again, Steve, for inviting me to participate in this. And I always enjoy speaking to people about these types of issues. And so I think that if I have a final word, it's just to move forward in very loving, open ways to understand and respect and trust that young people will find their way and all people will find their way to integrate into the larger world. And we have to continue to promote that type of self-determination, not only because it's the ethically right thing to do, I think, but also because I think it's the best way for people to learn and the best way for people to continue to recognize that this is how you continue to learn, right? So anybody else want to make a final remark before we end the session?
I'll make the final thanks to you, Carlo. Really appreciate your taking the time. Know that you have a tight schedule. Again, appreciate the message and all that you bring. For those of you who are watching the conference tonight, we have Herman Doyne for the Alternate Education Film Festival, talking about his film, The Forbidden Education, and then Jamie McMillan after that. So more fun coming on this pre-conference day. Thanks, Carlo. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. Bye for now.